On national television, J.D. Vance smirked his way through a dismissal of campaign finance reform, unaware that across from him, Jasmine Crockett was sitting on a minefield disguised as a manila folder. She didn't interrupt. She didn't flinch. But piece by piece, she unveiled damning donations, exposed insider emails, and played a voicemail that turned the air electric. Within minutes, his reputation buckled. His name flooded the internet. And the country watched a senator fall, not to shouting, but to precision. How did one woman dismantle a political giant, using nothing but evidence and silence? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. At exactly 8:58 a.m., the countdown clock above the studio cameras struck 2 minutes. In the heart of Austin, Texas, the set of Face the People buzzed beneath 1,000 watts of light, but the tension was invisible, hidden behind crisp lapels and forced smiles. J.D. Vance reclined in his seat like a man who'd already won. His navy suit caught the overhead gleam, and a sapphire tie sat slightly askew, an imperfection he wore like a badge of authenticity. As he launched into his opening remarks, his voice carried that practiced Midwestern charm. Campaign finance reform is just a buzzword, another ghost story from the left to keep voters afraid of their own shadows. He chuckled to himself. The host smiled politely, more out of habit than conviction. What the viewers didn't see, what even the floor director missed, was that Jasmine Crockett hadn't blinked in nearly 30 seconds. She sat across from him in a rust-toned blazer, her elbows on the armrests, spine straight, expression unreadable. Not cold, not warm, just waiting. And in that silence, the air thickened. What looked like calm was pressure barely held together. Jasmine Crockett hadn't come to debate. She came to detonate. Her hands resting lightly in her lap hid the storm she'd carried for weeks. This wasn't a panel. It was a trap. And J.D. Vance had already walked into it, grinning. Across America, viewers were still sipping coffee, unaware that within minutes, a senator would be dismantled. Not by outrage, but by cold, verified proof. Vance, the working-class poster boy turned political insider, had no idea this morning would mark the unraveling. Jasmine had waited, through his lies, through his smirks, through every shady deal passed off as politics. And now, she wasn't waiting anymore. And just like that, the silence cracked. Not with outrage or theatrics, but with the quiet, methodical sound of Jasmine Crockett unfastening the truth. She moved without haste. Her hand slid beneath the table and emerged with a slim folder. Plain, unmarked, the color of parchment left too long in the sun. The host looked up, slightly confused. J.D. Vance barely glanced at it, assuming it was nothing. But Jasmine knew the weight of what she held. It wasn't just paper. It was prelude. She laid the folder down flat, opened it carefully, and turned to the first page with the slow precision of someone who had rehearsed this motion in her mind 1,000 times. The page trembled only slightly as she held it up, not from nerves, but from the electricity in the room. "Before we go any further," she said, her voice even and unhurried, "I think viewers deserve to know what we're really talking about." The camera cut to her hand, now holding a standard issue FEC filing, blown up for clarity. The yellow highlighter streaked across the middle like a warning flare. Jasmine didn't dramatize it. She didn't need to. "This document," she continued, "is a financial disclosure form submitted on February 3rd. It records a $50,000 donation made to the Central Families for American Strength PAC." Her tone didn't shift. That PAC, as we know, is heavily aligned with the senator's policy apparatus. She paused, then placed the next sentence like a mine in the middle of the stage. "The donor, Dartland Strategic Holdings, a wholly owned subsidiary of Halvern Systems, a defense contractor under active federal investigation for falsifying project deliverables on government drone contracts." The temperature dropped. The host stiffened. A camera operator shifted slightly, almost imperceptibly. J.D. Vance blinked. Once. Twice. Then leaned back, throwing on the same old casual arrogance he always wore when cornered. He gave a clipped, dismissive laugh, like a man who's heard this tune before. "Public record," he said, waving a hand. "What people donate is their business. I don't control them." His voice was light, but something behind his eyes wasn't. That kind of defense might have worked in a closed Senate chamber. It might have worked behind the veil of party loyalty. But here, on live TV with millions watching, it sounded like insulation tearing off in the wind. Jasmine didn't break eye contact, didn't flinch. There was no venom in her gaze, only the weight of restraint. She leaned forward slightly, elbows still planted, her voice steady and low. "That's not an answer, Senator. That's an excuse." Then she placed the paper face down on the desk, like a card in a game she wasn't losing. "And I haven't even turned the page yet." No one spoke. For a full beat, the studio fell into a silence so sharp it might have cut glass. The unfairness of it all, how often men like Vance deflect, smile, and move on, hung in the air like smoke. But Jasmine didn't need volume. She didn't need anger. She had documentation. And J.D. Vance, for the first time in a very long time, looked like he didn't know what might come next. And as the audience was still absorbing the shock of the FEC filing, Jasmine flipped the next page, this time with more force. The paper made a crisp sound as it turned, sharp enough to slice through the atmosphere in the studio. She didn't speak immediately. She let the silence return, but now it pulsed with weight, like something unseen was coiling tighter with every second. Then, almost too calmly, she held up a new document, this one shorter but far more dangerous. "What comes after a donation," she said, "is often more telling than the donation itself." Her eyes flicked once toward the camera, as if inviting the country to lean in. "This," she continued, holding the page between two fingers, "is an internal email dated March 7th, addressed directly to your office from a senior lobbyist at Cormac Strategy Group." She paused, then read the body aloud. "Thank you again for your swift action following the bill's introduction. We appreciate your office's responsiveness and clarity." She lowered the page like a blade being sheathed. "That's not congratulations for leadership. That's confirmation of coordination." J.D. Vance let out a dry scoff, louder than it needed to be, the kind that fills a room when someone realizes silence no longer protects them. "That's hearsay," he said, waving his hand like a man swatting away a fly. "Anyone can write an email. It's not proof. It's opinion." He leaned back, recrossing his legs with forced ease. "And besides, I get thanked for things all the time. It's how politics works." But Jasmine didn't move, didn't blink. Her voice stayed as measured as a courtroom transcript. "Except this isn't just any email. It didn't come from a PAC volunteer or a campaign donor. It came from a federally registered lobbyist routed directly through your legislative office's official email server." She turned the document, revealing a high-resolution print of the metadata trail, and it was received by your senior policy advisor at 8:43 a.m., just hours after the bill's draft went public. Her tone never rose, but her precision made it impossible to look away. "I didn't say it. I didn't assume it. Your office confirmed it, in writing." The host blinked, unsure whether to intervene or stay silent. The producers behind the cameras froze, eyes locked on the real-time transcript feed, watching a congressional career thread itself into unraveling. And still, Jasmine sat perfectly still. No smugness, no adrenaline. Just the quiet, immovable posture of someone who had been forced to wait for justice longer than anyone else at that table could possibly understand. She had played by the rules. She had followed every channel. And yet, time after time, men like J.D. Vance got to dismiss facts as noise, call accountability, overreach, and shrug off consequence like it was optional. But now the words weren't allegations. They were receipts, and he couldn't laugh them away. And just as Jasmine finished her last sentence, calm, precise, and devastating, a ripple moved through the studio like the first shock of an earthquake no one saw coming. Up in the control room, behind soundproof glass, red indicator lights blinked to life in rapid succession. Heads turned. Keyboards clicked faster. 3 producers huddled around a central monitor where a live data verification stream was unfolding in real time. Every document Jasmine had submitted was now being cross-referenced. Timestamps, routing paths, domain origins. The studio had a protocol for these moments. A live verification team was built for political curveballs, but no one had expected this. The speed of the matches stunned even the staff. Within 30 seconds, the lead fact-checker pushed a button and relayed the result through the producer's headset, his voice clear, stunned. Confirmed. It's all clean. It's real. On the studio floor, the anchor's eyes flicked upward, briefly, subtly, toward the silent cue. He adjusted his tie, then turned to the camera and said, his voice dipping an octave, "We are receiving confirmation. Live at this very moment. The documents provided by Congresswoman Crockett have been authenticated. The email in question was sent from an official .gov address. The server data and signature trail match? Legislative archives." He paused, visibly rattled. "They are legitimate." J.D. Vance didn't flinch right away. For a second, he held the same practiced mask, chin lifted, hands folded in front of him. But then the truth began to crack through the polish. His right hand, once relaxed, now twitched near the corner of his notepad. His thumb tapped the table 3 times, then 4, then stopped altogether. The grin he wore earlier had curdled into a clenched line, and a faint sheen of sweat began to form just below his hairline. His foot, once crossed leisurely, now pressed flat against the studio floor, anchored as if he sensed the stage beneath him had started to shift. He opened his mouth slightly, then closed it again. For years, Vance had commanded rooms with that same easy confidence. A boy from Ohio who made good, who could spin policy like poetry, who never got caught sweating. But now, before millions of viewers, the man built on polish and deflection sat in deafening quiet as undeniable facts began to dismantle the armor he had mistaken for truth. And Jasmine, she didn't move, didn't gloat. She just watched, steady and silent. The weight of years of being dismissed now repaid, not with vengeance, but with verification. And just when the tension seemed to peak, Jasmine reached into the folder again, not rushed, not theatrical, but with a kind of dreadful certainty that made every eye in the room fix on her fingertips. She pulled out a single page, cream-colored and dense with corporate formatting. The Tredford Energy letterhead gleamed faintly beneath the studio lights, its seal embossed like something meant never to be questioned. She placed it gently on the table in front of her, facing the host and J.D. Vance, and slid it forward until it lay squarely in the center of the camera's overhead shot. Then, with a calmness that carried more force than any raised voice, she began, "This is an internal memo from Tredford Energy, dated April 7th. It was issued by the company's Senior Vice President of Government Affairs, 2 days before Senator Vance's office filed an amendment to the Industrial Infrastructure Bill." Her voice didn't change, but the words carried a precise, almost surgical weight. The language here is careful, but not careful enough. She raised the page to eye level and read aloud, slow and razor clean. "We anticipate positive movement on our permit requests following direct communication with Senator Vance's office scheduled this Thursday. Messaging alignment has been confirmed." Then silence. She let it hang. Let the implications swell into the stillness. "This wasn't a coincidence," she said. "It was choreography." J.D. Vance froze. His left hand dropped from the desk to his lap, where his fingers curled into the fabric of his pant leg. A tremor flickered along his thigh. Not enough to catch the average viewer's eye, but clear to anyone trained in body language or betrayal. The confidence in his posture buckled in microscopic fractures. He glanced at the anchor, then at the monitor just out of frame, as if looking for an off-ramp. But there wasn't one. Not here. Not now. His eyes briefly met Jasmine's, and something in them faltered. A twitch, a doubt, a recognition. He knew what she had just done, and Jasmine knew what it meant. For years, she had watched men like him glide through loopholes with a smile and a press release. She had seen documents like this buried in subcommittees, dismissed in closed-door hearings, redacted until meaningless. But here, on air, in front of a nation used to forgetting, she had brought it into the light. No speculation, no spin, just one undeniable truth, a memo with a timestamp that beat his vote by 48 hours. A company that didn't ask for permission, they expected results. And Vance had delivered them. And as the memo from Tredford Energy lay flat on the desk like a sealed indictment, its implications still rippling through the air, Jasmine Crockett exhaled softly, then delivered the turn no one had seen coming. Her eyes stayed locked on J.D. Vance, but her voice grew even calmer, as though peeling back the final layer didn't require force, just truth. "Let me be clear," she said. "I didn't uncover all this by accident, and I didn't dig it up myself. The truth didn't knock on my door. It walked in, carrying guilt it could no longer ignore." There was a pause, but it wasn't empty. It was heavy, stretched taut with anticipation. Even the studio lights seemed to dim, as if the set itself was holding its breath. "The documents," she continued, one hand resting lightly atop the folder, "came from someone who worked next to you, Senator. Not in theory, in proximity, in silence." She let the statement sit just long enough to see Vance's right hand clench slightly, his thumb pressing into the edge of the desk. She saw it. So did the cameras. He wasn't a politician, not a journalist, not a partisan hack. He was a logistics coordinator. You may not remember his name, but he remembers every room you were in. Vance didn't speak, but his composure betrayed him. His eyes narrowed, not with anger, but calculation. Searching. Who? When? How much had he seen? "He handled the details," Jasmine said, her tone sharpened but never raised. "The seating charts, the ride shares, the calls that couldn't be put on record. He booked the flights no one logged and sat in the corners of rooms where the real decisions were made. Not the ones you announced, the ones you negotiated." She tapped once on the desk, a soft but chilling metronome. "He watched as policy turned into currency, as your public promises were silently traded for corporate favors behind closed doors." The silence grew suffocating. Even the anchor, now leaning slightly forward, didn't interrupt. There were no questions to ask that hadn't already been answered by her presence, by the calm fury in her delivery. "And for a long time," she continued, "he said nothing. Not because he didn't care, but because that's how the system trains people like him, and people like me. Keep your head down. Don't speak unless spoken to. Let the powerful handle things, even when you know what they're doing is wrong." She glanced toward the camera. Not dramatically, just enough to remind the viewers watching at home that this wasn't about abstract corruption. It was about lives. "But then it got personal." Her voice dropped by a degree. Cooler now, almost too steady. "It got personal when your office pushed through a subcommittee amendment to reduce federal support for rural hospitals. It was a small clause, tucked into the language like a needle, something no headline ever covered. But it pulled the rug out from beneath places already hanging by a thread." She looked back at Vance. "One of those hospitals was in Decatur, Alabama. One of those nurses was his sister. She'd worked there 9 years, never missed a shift. And one morning she called him crying because the hospital was closing, because her job, her security, her future had disappeared overnight. No gasps, just the sound of breathing. One deep inhale across the room. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He just listened to her cry. Then he hung up and stared at his screen and realized that the memo, the one you helped move through committee, was one he'd formatted, edited, and distributed himself." Jasmine's words didn't accuse. They exposed. That was the breaking point, not because it was new, but because he finally understood what it meant to be part of the machine. He wasn't innocent, but he wasn't blind anymore either. And when he realized his silence had helped hurt someone he loved, he made a decision. She opened her palm and gestured to the folder. "He gave me this. Not for money, not for revenge, not to go viral or score political points. He didn't want attention. He didn't even ask for protection. He just said, 'I can't let this stay buried. Not after what it cost her, not after what it might keep costing other people.'" Jasmine's voice fell to a whisper, and yet somehow felt louder than anything else in the room. "And that," she said, "is the only reason we're having this conversation right now. The injustice, the imbalance, the way Vance's policies lived in sound bites while their consequences bled into real lives, had been brought to the table not by opposition or outrage, but by a man who had once helped hold the door open, a man who finally chose to close it." Jasmine didn't need applause. She didn't need the cameras to pan in, because for the first time, the truth wasn't just being spoken, it was being witnessed. And just as the gravity of Jasmine's previous revelation settled into the bones of the room, The anonymous insider, the sister's lost job, the undeniable trail of cause and effect. She moved without fanfare, reaching into the inner lining of her blazer with the kind of calm that felt surgical, rehearsed. From a narrow hidden pocket, she drew out a single silver flash drive. It was small, nearly invisible against the desk's black surface. But when she placed it gently near her notes, the gesture commanded more silence than any speech. She didn't raise it dramatically. She didn't smile. Instead, she looked toward the anchor and gave a single nod. "I received this less than 12 hours ago," she said. Her voice remained low, her cadence exact, the energy in the room bending toward her like iron to a magnet. "It's an audio file, a voicemail, left by the executive vice president of Tredford Energy." The anchor stiffened but didn't object. Behind the glass, the control room buzzed into motion, hands moving fast over dials, signals exchanged with tight nods. Jasmine waited for nothing. The message was left on the personal phone of one of Senator Vance's senior staffers. The timing is key. It was recorded just hours after the revised amendment language was submitted to committee. She folded her hands in front of her and leaned forward slightly. Not confrontational, but composed in a way that made even the microphone seem to lean closer. "Play it," she said simply. A soft click. Then the studio speakers came to life. Not with music, not with static, but with a voice. Male, confident, unapologetically casual. "Hey Rob, just wanted to say thanks again for walking us through the revision last Thursday. Really appreciate how tight the Senators team kept it. We're looking good on the permit front now. Phase 2 should be smooth. Let's catch up next month, our treat. Tell the boss we appreciate the discretion." The words rolled across the studio like slow thunder. There was no debate, no ambiguity, just confirmation, in the speaker's own voice, that the coordination between the company and the senator's office wasn't just real, it was routine. The final sentence, soft and flippant, "Tell the boss we appreciate the discretion," landed like a dagger sheathed in velvet. J.D. Vance reacted instantly, but not with logic, only instinct. He jerked forward, one palm slamming lightly against the desk, the other gesturing sharply toward the anchor. "This is a setup," he barked, his voice pitched higher than before, no longer steady. "You're going to let this play on live television without vetting it? You're letting her air anonymous voicemails like this as a courtroom?" There was panic now, not in his words, but in the way he was stringing them together, fast and jagged, like someone searching for a life raft in a rising tide. Jasmine didn't even blink, her eyes locked on him, not with fury, but with finality. "No, Senator," she replied, each syllable cut with quiet force. "This isn't a courtroom, and this isn't a stunt. It's context, and it just arrived." She didn't raise her voice because she didn't have to. The weight was in the truth, and the truth didn't need volume to feel like a hammer. The words hung in the air like smoke over a battlefield, thick, acrid, and impossible to ignore. There was no applause, no dramatic music, no one yelling over her. Only the slow, dawning realization that what had once been a carefully guarded distance between power and payoff had just been compressed into a 26-second voicemail, delivered in the executive's own voice, dripping with entitlement and casual corruption. And in that stillness, where the power used to sit quietly behind smiles and polished rebuttals, Jasmine didn't look triumphant. She looked done waiting, done warning, done playing fair with a system that never extended the same to her. And as J.D. Vance reached again for a response, for a way to breathe past the moment, all that echoed back was his silence, made louder now by a voice that wasn't even hers. And as the final echoes of Jasmine's calm but shattering phrase, "It's context, and it just arrived," faded from the air, the outside world did not wait for commercial breaks or closing statements. It exploded. The platform formerly known as Twitter, now simply X, lit up with a ferocity usually reserved for breaking wars or celebrity deaths. But this was different. This was real-time political reckoning, and it came with a face. J.D. Vance's face. A close-up from the live broadcast, eyes wide, jaw caught between defense and collapse, a bead of sweat tracing the edge of his temple, was screenshotted, zoomed, frozen, and reposted thousands of times within minutes. One user added the caption, "When you realize the cameras caught the cover-up." Another stitched the image side by side with Jasmine Crockett's unwavering glare and wrote, "David brought a folder." The meme floodgates had opened, but the humor wasn't just for laughs. It carried an unmistakable undercurrent of catharsis. For every tweet mocking Vance's unraveling, there were threads beneath them, raw, blistering reflections from nurses, teachers, veterans, small business owners, people who had felt invisible in the corridors of power he once strutted through untouched. And now they were watching him fall in pixels and silence. But the numbers told a deeper story. The network had rolled out a live audience poll just as the voicemail segment aired. A simple question: do you find Congresswoman Crockett's evidence credible? The banner crawled beneath the screen, nearly unnoticed at first, but as the seconds passed, viewers began responding in waves. 53%, then 61%. By the 3-minute mark, it locked in at 68%. Not a margin of error, not a toss-up, a decisive, nearly 2/3 verdict from the American public, delivered not in courts or campaigns, but live during the broadcast. And the number didn't budge. It held. In a digital landscape that shifts by the millisecond, it was as unflinching as the woman who had triggered it. Then came the quote. Jasmine had said it with no dramatic pause, no flourish, no shout. Just a line dropped with chilling precision, like the last nail in a coffin. "If it's false, sue me." The studio hadn't even processed it when the internet already had. Within minutes, it was everywhere. X, TikTok, Instagram stories, even the subreddits usually reserved for memes and gaming. One post simply showed the quote in white letters on a black screen. No tags, no caption, just the line. Another clip set the moment to a slow orchestral build, timing the crescendo to Jasmine's delivery. By the 10-minute mark, users were changing their bios to the phrase. By the hour, it was trending #1 in 7 states. It wasn't just a catchphrase, it was a declaration, a dare. A woman standing alone under the harsh lights of a live broadcast, holding a man with power accountable, and daring him, in front of the nation, to come for her if she was wrong. But the system wasn't used to that. For decades, men like J.D. Vance had weathered scandal with silence, cloaked their deals in vague language, distanced themselves from the very policies they voted for. But no one had ever said it so plainly. Sue me. It was the legal equivalent of flipping the chessboard and demanding a rematch, with cameras rolling. And the audience, tired, wired, jaded, skeptical, recognized it instantly. It wasn't a performance, it was proof. And Jasmine Crockett had just dared an empire to respond. So far, it hadn't, but America had. And as the weight of Jasmine's last move, the voicemail, the challenge, the calm dismantling, still pulsed through the room like aftershock, the anchor finally found his voice. But it was different now. The neutrality was gone. The polish faded. What emerged was something strained, urgent, and just slightly unsteady. As if he, too, understood they had crossed into uncharted territory. He cleared his throat, fingers twitching once over his stack of cards before discarding them entirely. "Given the serious nature of what's been presented here today," he said slowly, "our team has arranged for an immediate legal response. Joining us now live is Melinda Drury, former ethics investigator with the Department of Justice and an expert in congressional oversight." The screen split and a new presence filled the broadcast. A woman framed in the quiet gravity of a book-lined office, her eyes direct, her tone stripped of opinion. She didn't posture. She didn't stall. She simply answered. "This doesn't yet rise to a federal crime," she said, "not without further documentation and a formal subpoena process. But make no mistake, what you're seeing here is a textbook ethical failure, not in isolation, in pattern, repeated behavior, influence over legislation by private entities that benefit directly, and more than that, coordinated concealment of that influence, which, if verified by the Senate Ethics Committee, would represent a breach of public trust at the highest level." The studio returned to full frame. The anchor shifted in his seat, lips parting as if to ask Jasmine for a response. But she was already moving, slowly, deliberately, without saying a word. From the inside flap of her folder, she pulled a small, unlabeled USB drive. Matte black. No markings, no branding. Just a clean, silent vessel containing everything. Every memo, every email, every calendar log, cross-reference, internal note, and transcript. She didn't hold it up. She didn't announce what it was. She simply leaned forward, extended her hand, and slid the drive across the glossy desk toward the anchor. It moved like a blade sheathed in quiet intent, stopping precisely in front of him, no more than an inch from his untouched coffee cup. Then she spoke, only once. "It's all there," she said, not with triumph, but with gravity. Unredacted, chronological, verified. Her voice didn't rise, her shoulders didn't shift, but something in the room did. The temperature dropped. The weight of what she had just turned over was unmistakable. It was the culmination of weeks spent tracing shadows, cross-checking signatures, interviewing quietly in rooms with no windows, assembling not just a case, but a reckoning. And she hadn't come to accuse. She had come to document, to hand over the truth in a form that could no longer be spun, minimized, or buried under procedural delay. There were no dramatics, no camera sweeps, no sound cues. Only the sound of a USB drive clicking gently against glass, and a nation, somewhere beyond the studio walls, beginning to understand what accountability finally looked like when it wore no anger, no ego, and no fear. And as the studio lights dimmed and the screen dissolved into a commercial break, the illusion of control disintegrated. J.D. Vance didn't wait for the segment to end. He stood abruptly, tearing off his mic with shaking fingers, the cord whipping against his blazer. His phone was already in his hand, trembling under the weight of push notifications arriving in bursts like machine gun fire. Every step he took away from the set was faster, sharper, more desperate. The moment he cleared the last LED rig, he barked into the screen, "Get media on the line." All of it. Now. But the algorithm had already outrun him. 7 states, Ohio, Arizona, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Georgia, and North Carolina, were trending with some variation of number Vance exposed or number sue me then. The image of his frozen expression, captured just before Jasmine slid the USB across the desk, had become a meme of national proportion. His comms director tried calling 3 times. He declined everyone. Instead, he opened a staff group thread and typed, "Lock. Everything. Down. Shut the accounts before this spreads any further." But it was too late. Videos were being remixed on TikTok. Tweets had racked up hundreds of thousands of likes. News banners were already looping his quote, taken wildly out of context. "This is playing dirty." He turned a corner, nearly knocking over a lighting assistant, and shoved open the exit to a side hallway not meant for talent. The quiet of the corridor made the chaos in his head sound louder. He was alone now, just him and the flood. He yanked the phone back up, and this time connected to a top advisor. "Delete the entire X account. Every tweet, every reel. I don't care. Pull it down." The voice on the other end hesitated, stammered something about optics. That was the last straw. JD's voice went from strained to volcanic in one breath. "God damn it, do it!" he bellowed, slamming his fist so hard against the cinder block wall that the impact echoed down the corridor. "If we let this sit out there, we're not just getting dragged, we're setting ourselves on fire. Take it down now, or we kill the campaign ourselves." There it was, the moment every staffer feared but never named, when the candidate lost control not just of the message, but of the mirror. No spin, no redirect. Just a man who had built a platform on confidence, now unraveling under fluorescent hallway lights with a cracked voice and blood rising in his cheeks. It wasn't Jasmine Crockett's folder that broke him. It was the echo chamber he had spent years cultivating, now turning in real time to tear him apart. And the worst part? The cameras weren't rolling anymore, but the internet never stopped. Back in the studio, while J.D. Vance spiraled somewhere off camera, Jasmine Crockett remained still, eerily still. She hadn't moved a single inch since the moment he fled. Her posture was almost statuesque, as if carved into the leather of her chair. One hand rested lightly atop the folder that had ignited a political inferno, fingers splayed but steady, as if anchoring herself in the eye of the storm. Her breathing was measured, her gaze fixed. She didn't gloat. She didn't revel. She simply waited as if this moment had already played out in her mind days ago, frame by frame. The storm had always been coming. She had simply chosen to face it without flinching. The network anchor, now visibly rattled but still composed enough to steer the broadcast, turned back to the camera. "Given the gravity of what's unfolded here," he said, pausing to glance off screen for confirmation, "we've brought back legal analyst Melinda Drury for an emergency ethics review." The screen split again, revealing Drury's stern face, her DC background replaced with a stark legal graphic. She didn't waste time. "This is no longer a question of political embarrassment," she stated. "If what's been presented holds up, and initial verification suggests it does, then we are looking at repeated, coordinated influence by private entities on federal legislation. That, under Section 301 of the Congressional Ethics Act, meets the threshold for immediate inquiry by the Office of Congressional Ethics. This isn't just smoke, it's a fire with paperwork." That single phrase, "a fire with paperwork," hit the control room like a seismic wave. The production crew exchanged glances. Engineers whispered into headsets. Editors began clipping the segment for syndication before the show had even ended. Still, Jasmine did not speak. Her silence was not absence, it was presence refined to its sharpest edge. Because she knew what was happening beyond the studio walls. She knew the sound of high-speed keystrokes in PR firms across Washington. She knew that PACs were scrambling to rewrite talking points, that comms directors were fielding panic calls from donors now asking why they hadn't been warned. She knew that websites once proudly plastered with "backed by J.D. Vance" were now quietly being wiped clean. Entire pages were being pulled, search histories redirected, caches cleared. In private donor forums, places where Jasmine would never be invited, panic bloomed like a virus. From New York hedge fund rooms to Houston oil boardrooms. One directive spread: disassociate. Now, they didn't wait for the ethics panel to make a decision. They didn't wait for JD to spin it. Because when the documents are real, the calls are logged, the voices recorded, spin doesn't matter. Survival does. And at the center of it all sat Jasmine Crockett, silent but unyielding. Not a victor, not a villain. Just a woman who had decided to hold the system to the light, regardless of who squinted first. Upstairs, far from the cameras and the glowing screens that now looped Jasmine's takedown on every major feed, the atmosphere in J.D. Vance's war room was suffocating. No windows, just tension and fluorescent lights. The door slammed behind him as he entered, still flushed from the fallout, still gripping the phone like it owed him answers. A half circle of advisors turned from their laptops, waiting, some afraid to breathe. He didn't sit, didn't pause. "Find out who gave her that file," he barked. "I don't care how. I want a name, an address, a leak chart. We've been blindsided, and someone's going to bleed for it." The room sprang into motion, fingers flying over keys, screens blinking open with tracking tools and encrypted logs. But within minutes, their movement slowed, then stopped. The lead cybersecurity advisor, a former NSA contractor with clearance levels higher than most Senate staff, looked up from his screen, lips tight. "Sir, there's nothing to trace." Vance blinked. "What do you mean, nothing?" "No headers, no IP, no shadow bounce. The file came through a masked relay that wiped itself after delivery. Even the metadata inside the PDF was hollow. No timestamps, no authorship, no creation log, just the content, as if someone built the document inside a black box." The silence that followed wasn't confusion, it was dread. Vance stepped closer, towering over the screen. "Check again." "We did. 3 different tools. We ran a forensic sweep on the raw data. It's clean. Too clean. Whoever did this didn't just cover their tracks, they deleted the path behind them." That hit differently. This wasn't some disgruntled intern or careless staffer with access. This was someone trained, someone patient, someone who understood the mechanics of exposure and the anatomy of evasion, someone who didn't want credit, didn't want revenge, didn't even leave a signature. J.D. Vance backed away from the screen, pulse climbing, because what he saw now wasn't just a leak. It was a ghost with a mission, one who'd buried their identity so completely that even his team couldn't resurrect it. And that terrified him more than the documents themselves. The room hadn't moved in minutes, but the tremor from what just happened still echoed across the building. In the control room, analysts whispered urgently into headsets. On Twitter, the hashtags multiplying by the second. In boardrooms across D.C., emails marked confidential urgent were being opened like fire alarms. The studio lights dimmed slightly as the crew prepared for a long reset. But Jasmine Crockett remained at her seat, centered in stillness. The storm outside no longer concerned her, not because it wasn't dangerous, but because she had already survived its first wave. And in the moments after Vance vanished backstage in a frenzy of rage and retreat, something soft pierced through the noise. A runner approached her desk quietly, clutching an envelope, plain and unmarked except for one handwritten detail in fading blue ink. From Beverly Darnell, Lansing, Michigan. Jasmine's eyes flickered. Her hands moved slowly as she received it, not with suspicion, but with the reverence reserved for memories that arrive when you need them most. She knew that name, not from headlines, not from D.C., but from the 7th grade classroom with cracked windows and chalk dust in the corners. Beverly Darnell had taught her history, but more than that, had taught her how to see patterns where others only saw dates. It was Darnell who once paused a lecture on the Bill of Rights to point at Jasmine, 12 years old, furious about a broken school projector, and said, "You're not too loud. You're precise, and someday that will scare people." Jasmine had never forgotten it, and now that woman, retired unseen for years, had sent a letter. No digital timestamp, no grand gesture, just a folded piece of paper inside an old-school envelope, hand-delivered during chaos. Jasmine opened it, slow, careful. There were only 14 words. "You're showing people what courage looks like in real time." That was it. No date, no signature flourish, no explanation. Just that sentence, scrawled in the same looping script Jasmine remembered watching on the blackboard years ago. She didn't cry. She smiled, but not the smile of someone who had just won. Not the smile of vindication. It was something quieter, sadder, stronger. Because that sentence wasn't about evidence. It wasn't about Vance. It was about what the world almost missed in the fury. That truth, when wielded by someone calm, focused, and unwilling to be broken, doesn't just cut, it illuminates. For weeks, Jasmine had endured the smirks, the interruptions, the late-night segments mocking her tone and questioning her credentials. She'd heard every whisper, seen every comment section calling her too much, too angry, too dramatic. She'd held her tongue while men with polished shoes and brittle egos rewrote the rules around her. And now, sitting under the harsh lights of a studio that had just witnessed one of the most complete unravelings of a public figure in recent memory, she was still, because someone had seen, not just the performance, not the headline, not the fire, but the courage in real time. The courage to show up armed not with venom, but with verified records. The courage to wait, to breathe, to not interrupt. The courage to hold up truth with a steady hand while the other side screamed ambush, and someone who mattered had noticed. The envelope sat beside her now, folded once more. Not as a trophy, not as a weapon, but as proof that even in the middle of a televised maelstrom, the real victory wasn't measured in polls or applause. It was measured in the quiet recognition that when you stand in truth, someone always sees it. And sometimes that someone is the person who taught you to speak in the first place. She placed the envelope down gently, her fingers brushing the edge as if grounding herself in the reminder. Truth was never loudest when shouted. It was loudest when proven. But just as the studio began to exhale, producers leaning back, the anchor clearing his throat for a return from break, another wave surged in, unseen but already unavoidable. Jasmine's phone vibrated beneath the folder on her lap. One pulse, then another, then silence. No name, No number, just an encrypted address, 4 characters, a dot, a scrambled domain. Attached, a file, pipeline index memo.zip. She opened it without flinching. No theatrics, no announcement. Just her eyes scanning line after line as the studio faded around her. What she saw didn't shake her. It confirmed her worst expectation. Inside the folder, a thread of emails 10 deep, internal, time-stamped, cross-referenced, no redactions. Between 3 sitting senators, identities withheld, but domain headers unmistakably congressional, and a lobbying firm Jasmine had already named minutes earlier. Subject line, Strategic Amendments, Early Access Coordination. One line in particular struck like a cold blade through warm air. Let's sync our phrasing post-call to match the Ohio precedent. It worked for Vance. Her hands stiffened. She didn't speak yet. She just kept reading. Every message mirrored the same tone. Quiet confidence, casual collusion. Terms like expedited compliance, donor reassurance language, and post-vote soft landing. Legal phrases dressed in marketing polish, hiding open-door deals that shaped laws long before they reached public debate. These weren't Vance's fingerprints anymore. This was something else. This wasn't a story about one man's fall. It was about a pattern, replicated, shared, normalized. She tapped the side of the folder twice, a signal to the assistant producer monitoring her feed. He looked up. She didn't nod. She didn't smile. Just turned the screen so that one phrase from the memo filled it. Match the Ohio precedent, and suddenly, what had been a live implosion of one man's narrative began to widen into a breach much larger. This wasn't just corruption, it was choreography. The studio lights brightened again, unaware of the shift. But Jasmine knew. A new game had begun. She turned back toward the anchor's desk, her face unreadable. Not angry, not triumphant, just precise. Across the screen, the phrase, Pipeline Index Memo, appeared in white text over black background. For now, only the control room could see it. But it wouldn't stay there for long, because what Jasmine had in her hands was more than scandal. It was architecture. Blueprints for influence, sold and bought with surgical coordination. She had already lit the fuse under J.D. Vance's credibility, but now she was staring at a document that proved he was just one tile in a much larger mosaic of deceit. And that changed everything. The silence around her wasn't peace. It was compression, the kind that comes before thunder. No studio staff moved. No papers shuffled. Everyone was waiting, breath held. Jasmine didn't say a word, because she didn't have to. Not yet. The file had already spoken, and in the data, metadata untouched, headers intact, was a truth that would ricochet far beyond the confines of one televised takedown. This wasn't personal anymore. It was structural, and the real reckoning had only just begun. The studio floor still echoed with everything that hadn't been said aloud. Behind Jasmine Crockett, the screen had long since gone dark. But in her mind, the next steps burned with clarity. The memo she received wasn't the climax, it was the doorway. And Jasmine Crockett wasn't interested in the noise of virality. She was aiming for something far more dangerous, accountability in rooms that hated the very word. That night, long after the lights went cold and headlines burst across networks, Jasmine didn't go home. She sat in her Capitol Hill office, shoes off, her blazer folded neatly beside a printer, humming with relentless purpose. A folder labeled Addendum, Section 301 Review, Patterns of Influence was slowly being compiled, tabbed, color-coded, and cross-verified against 4 years' worth of archived legislative activity. This wasn't public theater anymore. This was for someone who understood what silence cost. And Jasmine had someone in mind. Senator Elaine Dorsett, not a bomb thrower, not a camera chaser, a former prosecutor turned senator whose presence in the ethics committee had become more symbolic than feared. But Jasmine knew something others overlooked. Dorsett was waiting for someone to give her a reason to move. At 3:12 a.m., the final page of the supplemental report rolled out of the tray. Jasmine signed the cover sheet with a red pen and slid the entire bundle into a sealed envelope. No aides, no emails. Just a direct courier to Dorsett's chief of staff, with a handwritten note, "For the senator's eyes only. Confidential. Pre-review request." The next day passed without response. No headlines changed. No retweets surged. And Jasmine didn't speak of it, not even to her closest allies. Then at 7:47 p.m. that evening, her private line rang. Unlisted number. She answered with only a quiet, "Crockett." The voice on the other end was male, composed. The senator read it, all of it. Jasmine didn't respond. She waited. A breath. "She wants to see you, off record, tomorrow, 4 p.m., her private conference room, no phones." Click. The line died. And that was it. The elevator up to the 5th floor of the Senate Hart building was silent, save for the slow sweep of red numbers climbing. Jasmine wore no makeup today. No cameras were expected. Her folder was thin, just one page tucked into the leather binder. But her mind carried 100 weights, each one sourced from a broken promise wrapped in lobbyist dollars. The receptionist nodded wordlessly as she arrived. Doors were already unlocked. Inside, Senator Elaine Dorset was standing by the window, arms crossed, her expression unreadable beneath silver-streaked hair in a steel-gray suit. No aides, no tea, just the stillness of a woman who had once sent men to prison with nothing but a closing argument. She didn't motion Jasmine to sit. She just spoke. "You didn't leak that file." It wasn't a question. Jasmine shook her head once. "No." Dorset turned slowly. Her eyes were sharp. "And you didn't redact your name from the ethics addendum. I wanted you to know who was standing behind it." There was a long silence. Then Dorset gestured toward the chair. Jasmine sat. The senator remained standing. "You could have made noise. You had it all. The memo, the tape, the trend lines." Dorset's voice was calm but deliberate, like a knife being cleaned. "You didn't come here to burn it all down, did you?" Jasmine's answer was immediate, soft but steady. "No, I came to expose the rot without torching the house." Dorset exhaled. She crossed to the other end of the table and finally sat, hands folded like she was weighing glass. "My office confirmed the metadata," Dorset said. "The memo, it mirrors an old case I prosecuted in '94. Only then, they had the decency to do it over fax." A pause. "Lobbyists, 3 senators, pre-coordinated phrasing. If this unravels publicly, you'll be hunted by both sides." Jasmine met her gaze. "I know. You'll be called the poison. I'm used to that. And if this goes nowhere, if the committee blocks it, you'll be labeled a partisan stunt. I didn't write this report to go somewhere. I wrote it because I still believe truth has weight." Dorset leaned back, studying her. Then came the shift, subtle but tectonic. The senator reached for the single sheet Jasmine brought and turned it over, reading the quote Jasmine had included at the bottom. "Sunlight doesn't scream, it shines." The room went still. Dorset finally spoke, not in defense, not in challenge, but in realization. "You didn't come here to make noise," she said quietly. Her eyes rose to meet Jasmine's, and this time, there was something else behind them. Conviction. "You came to make it clear." Jasmine didn't smile, but her shoulders for the first time in days relaxed. Dorset set the sheet down. Her voice was calm but final. "All right, Congresswoman, I'll walk this into the committee myself. No staff, no chatter." A pause. "But understand this. If I move, the machinery will move too. And it won't stop with Vance. There are others in those emails who won't go down quietly. You're lighting a corridor full of fuel." Jasmine stood, picking up the empty folder. "Then it's time someone stopped walking in the dark." Dorset gave a single nod. And just like that, Jasmine turned and walked out of the room. Not faster, not slower, but with the quiet gravity of a woman who had not just survived the fire, she had redirected it. But even as private rooms shifted toward investigation and classified corridors whispered of ethics inquiries, the man at the center of the firestorm wasn't finished speaking. Not yet. 48 hours after the confrontation that redefined the broadcast, J.D. Vance stepped onto a gleaming stage set up hastily outside his Ohio campaign headquarters. Flanked by two American flags and a podium engraved with his own name, Vance's expression was taut with defiance. Flashbulbs fired like rifle cracks. Anchors murmured in split screens, and live feeds broadcast his every breath across 6 networks. The microphone hissed as he leaned forward. "I stand before you today," Vance began, voice strained through a rehearsed calm, "as the target of a deliberate, coordinated political conspiracy." No one gasped, because no one was surprised. "This is not about ethics," he continued, gripping the podium harder than needed. "This is not about accountability. This is about a vendetta, about silencing conservative voices like mine, using doctored documents and anonymous sources to destroy reputations without evidence." The cameras didn't blink, but the crowd, smaller than usual, older than expected, shifted uncomfortably. There were no cheers, just the low, rustling disquiet of people trying to decide whether they were hearing courage or desperation. Behind him, the giant screen played a reel of talking heads from sympathetic outlets, cropped headlines, split-second freeze frames of Jasmine Crockett with a folder. But none of it could erase what millions had already seen, and none of it could silence the weight of a sentence that now echoed online like gospel. "If it's false, sue me." A statement that had become more than a challenge. It had become a battle line. And Vance, in that moment, looked like a man staring across a canyon that was no longer rhetorical, but real. The speech dragged on. He blamed the legacy media. He blamed the DC machine. He blamed what he called radical actors posing as watchdogs. But for every accusation, there was an absence. No direct denial of the memo, no refutation of the audio, no explanation of the time-stamped emails verified by neutral third parties. Only noise, controlled, intentional noise. And the country had moved on. By the time Vance walked off stage, wiping sweat from his brow with a handkerchief that looked too crisp to feel honest, Twitter X had already exploded again, but not in his favor. The phrase, "I'm the victim," began trending, but not how he'd hoped. One user posted a side-by-side, J.D. Vance at the podium, captioned, "I'm the victim," next to a photo of a laid-off single mother in Akron who had been affected by the very policy his vote helped pass. Her sign read, "I'm the collateral." Another post showed a split screen, Jasmine Crockett holding up documented proof, and J.D. Vance yelling into a mic. The caption? "One brought receipts, the other brought excuses." A live poll from Morning Results showed a brutal number. 71% of respondents believed Jasmine. Only 19% believed Vance. The rest chose, too afraid to say what they believe. By 6 p.m., the number "not the victim" hashtag had hit 2.8 million uses. And even worse, for Vance, it wasn't just voters. Even loyal surrogates on smaller networks began to shift. On one conservative panel, a former strategist who had once helped run Vance's PAC uttered a line that caught fire instantly. "He says it's a witch hunt, but witches don't usually come with email headers and verified signatures." Inside the media control rooms, anchors didn't hide their tone anymore. One muttered live, "This is a man grasping at air while drowning in facts." Another, "He brought flags and flags alone." And perhaps the sharpest knife came from a legal analyst on a center-right stream. When someone is innocent, they don't scream conspiracy. They scream proof. Vance hasn't shown any. Elsewhere, Jasmine Crockett remained quiet. She gave no press conference. She posted no threads. But her silence spoke louder than Vance's entire podium performance. Because while JD shouted victimhood into cameras, Jasmine was still in the shadows, sending packets, compiling crosswalks between donation patterns and legislation timelines, letting truth ferment while ego tried to reclaim the narrative. And people noticed. A comment with over 230,000 likes read simply, "Vance said political hit job." Jasmine said nothing, because she didn't need to. Meanwhile, on the ground in Ohio, local volunteers began peeling off Vance's campaign stickers from windows. One coffee shop that had hosted a fundraiser 2 months prior issued a statement online. "We believe in integrity. That starts with accountability. We are reevaluating our endorsements." By morning, 5 major donors had pulled soft money pledges, and a 6th, when asked anonymously, responded, We don't fund panic, especially not when it comes dressed as patriotism. And still, J.D. Vance clung to the podium long after the crowd had stopped applauding. He issued one final plea, his voice rising, "I won't be silenced. I won't be canceled. I will stand firm against this injustice." But the problem wasn't cancellation. It was clarity. And the people? They didn't see a man being hunted. They saw a man finally cornered by the consequences of his own shadow. Even as J.D. Vance's media tour sputtered into desperation and hashtags carved themselves into the skin of national headlines, Jasmine Crockett did not speak. She didn't tour morning shows. She didn't accept a single podcast invite. No camera crew parked outside her door. While the world screamed, she went quiet, not as retreat, but as refinement. And in that stillness, she worked. Inside a modest office lit by warm lamplight and the glow of a muted TV in the corner, Jasmine sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by envelopes, some crumpled, some hand-decorated, some folded neatly with trembling reverence. They came from everywhere: Michigan steelworkers, Arizona teachers, North Carolina farmers, a retired woman in Queens who said she cried during Jasmine's final sentence. Each letter pulsed with truth. None were read aloud for clicks. Beside her sat a polished wooden box, engraved not with her name, but a word: witness. And as she opened one envelope after another, she didn't just read the stories, she memorized them. A boy named Malik from Detroit wrote, "I didn't think people like you even got inside those rooms. Now I know they can." A woman named Denise from Tulsa scribbled her message on the back of a Walmart receipt: "They took my job, but they didn't take my voice. Thank you for using yours." Jasmine folded each one with care, brushing the corners flat with the side of her hand. She placed them inside the box like sacred offerings, not to her, but to the truth they represented. Not trophies, not applause, testimonies. Then came a knock. Rami, her longtime aide, strategist, and in moments like this, her anchor, stepped inside without a word. He didn't ask why the lights were dimmed, why she hadn't returned a single call in 3 days. He already knew. The real fight wasn't over. It had just gone underground. She glanced up. "Did the senator call again?" Rami nodded. "Twice. She says press is begging for a follow-up. Editorials are pouring in." Jasmine reached for another envelope instead of answering. She read, folded, slipped it in. Finally, she looked up at him, eyes not tired, but sharpened, quiet like the air before a storm. "You know what comes next, don't you?" she said. Rami hesitated. "Retaliation?" She smiled faintly. "Revision." He tilted his head. "They'll rewrite it," she murmured. "All of it. Not now, but soon. They'll come back around, smiling, quoting me, pretending they were on this side the whole time." A pause stretched long enough for the television screen to flicker with an ad for a pharmaceutical lobbyist gala. She nodded toward the letters. These people, Malik, Denise, the nurse from Richmond, they're not here to forget. They're here to remind. Rami stepped closer. "So what do we do?" She reached for the lid of the wooden box, now filled nearly to the brim with voices the news cycle would soon try to drown, and she whispered, "We remember for them." Then she stood, walked slowly to her desk, and slid the box into a narrow shelf marked 2024. Next to it sat another folder, thicker than the rest, labeled, "To be used only when they lie again." She turned to Rami, pulled her blazer over her shoulders like armor, and walked to the door. Before exiting, she glanced down at his worn leather boots. "You might want thicker soles," she said. He blinked. "Why?" Jasmine's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "Because the next time they come back here, smiling, faking loyalty, they'll say they've always supported this, that they stood with us, that they never doubted, and we'll hear it again and again in offices and airports and camera pits." She opened the door and looked back one last time. "So bring sturdy shoes, Rami. There'll be a lot of footsteps walking in reverse. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.